Hi, I'm Gareth Green and welcome to this video which is on voice leading tips, and it's episode 6 of our little mini series of videos on the subject. So once you've seen this one, you might want to search out the others. You don't have to do these in any particular order actually, so don't worry if you're starting with number 6. But I'm just offering a series of bits of advice on voice leading, kind of like, which notes am I writing? How does one note progress to another, or one chord progress to another? Any hints and tips, things to do, things to avoid, that kind of thing. Well, here's an avoidance one. We're trying to avoid, when we're writing 4-part harmony in keys, we're trying to avoid what we call parallel or consecutive perfect fifths and perfect octaves. Okay, so if, for example, I write an octave, I've got 2 Fs there, and I follow it in the same pair of parts with 2 different octaves. So I've gone F, F, G, G. That's considered to be consecutive. So I've got 2 Fs, 2 Gs, 2 separate parts, and a pair of octaves next door to each other, or perfect fifths. Say I had a C and a G, followed by a D and an A. That's one perfect fifth followed by another perfect fifth in the same pair of parts. And you can hear that that doesn't sound great doing that kind of stuff. So it generally impairs the quality of 4-part harmony if you start moving around in these consecutive or parallel perfect fifths, perfect octaves. If you can avoid doing that, then the kind of integrity of your 4 parts is much stronger. Now, you might turn around and say, well, hang on, I play a piece of music that does this in the right hand all the time, lots of octaves or something. That's fine. That's a different thing. It's a feature of the texture to have a melody that's focused in octaves, or a bass line that might be running in octaves. That's absolutely fine. And those things, generally speaking, don't happen in 4-part harmony. So when you're writing 4 parts, a string quartet, 4-part choir, something like that, this is something you want to be much keener on. So let's look at an example of this. So I've just written a couple of chords here. I've got a C major chord followed by a D minor chord. If you're looking in the key of C major with Roman numerals, it's chord 1 followed by chord 2. Okay, well, it doesn't sound too bad, does it? No, but what's wrong with it? Well, let's have a look. I've indicated consecutive octaves in red and consecutive fifths in blue. So it even comes with color code in this video. So can you see in the soprano part, I've got the C moving on to a D, but at the same time, the bass is doing the same thing at a different octave. Okay, it might be 2 octaves below, but they're both going C, D. So that's considered to be consecutive or parallel octaves. Even if it's 2 octaves or 4 octaves or something, it's still consecutive or parallel. And it's a bit weak to do that. Okay, we've also got fifths, because if you look at the tenor and the bass, we've got C and G there. That's a perfect fifth apart, followed by D and A. That's another perfect fifth apart. Now, strangely, if you had a diminished fifth followed by a perfect fifth, or a perfect fifth followed by a diminished fifth, that's kind of okay. But if you've got a perfect fifth followed by a perfect fifth, you can hear it sounds a bit kind of, if it had done this, so the top part, the tenor part, had gone G, F, that would be so much better, wouldn't it? Because the parts would be moving in contramotion. It's stronger than them both going in the same direction by the same interval, these perfect fifths. And then, of course, in this example, we have both consecutive or parallel octaves and consecutive or parallel fifths. And that sounds a bit clunky. Now, if I'd kind of fix that by maybe using a different chord, if I was harmonizing C to D and I'd gone chord 1 to chord 5, that would have been much better, wouldn't it? Or a C major chord to a G major chord. If I'd really wanted to go from a C major chord to a D minor chord, I could have done something like C major in root position to D minor in first inversion. That sounds much better than all this this consecutive parallel movement. Or I could have had C major in first inversion, followed by D minor in root position. You see, I'm avoiding those parallels. So if you're writing something in 4 parts and then you realize you've got some of these consecutive octaves, consecutive fifths, parallel octaves, parallel fifths, well, one thing you could do is start changing one or more of the chords. Another thing you can do is to change the inversion of one of the chords next to another one. Another thing you can do is to kind of reorganize the writing of the individual parts to make this fit. But you can always guarantee when you're writing in 4 parts, if you can flush out these consecutives, these parallels, the result will be much better. Now, we've just been listening to that in relation to 2 consecutive chords. Let's run this out into something that's now 4 bars long, 4 measures long. And let's assume we're harmonizing this melody at the top. And I've purposely done a harmonization here, which has got just about as many consecutives or parallels in as I can fit. So have a listen to this version and see if you can hear the cumulative impact of all these consecutives or parallels. Now, you might listen to that and think, well, sounds all right to me. I don't know what all the fuss is about. The great thing about this is not that it necessarily sounds bad, in the sense it doesn't sound awful, you haven't got clashing notes or anything. It's just that it doesn't sound as good as it could do. And one reason why that's the case is that there's not much independence between the parts. If you've got 4 parts all moving up together, then all moving down together, and you've got all these resultant consecutives or parallels, it's not actually so clever when you think about it. So you can see what's going on. I've got octaves here, octaves there between the top and the bottom. And then it all just piles up. We carry on with octaves between the alto part and the tenor part there. So that's not so clever. And we've got fifths all over the place. So we've got fifths between the upper pair of parts all the way there. And we've also got fifths between the bass part and the top part. So an awful lot of parallels or consecutives. Now, what I've done here is that I've taken exactly the same melody and I've reorganized the writing in the ways that I was talking about. I kept the first chord the same. Here we had what's in Roman numerals a 7B chord, but I changed it to a 5B chord. Well, chord 5, chord 7, very interchangeable. Why did I do that? Well, instead of the bass going up in the same direction as the soprano part's going up, I've let the bass part come down, so they're going in opposite motion, which is bound to be better. And you can't get consecutive parallels if you're going in opposite motion. And it's flushed out our troubles there, isn't it? Then this was a G major chord in first inversion. Okay, here's a G major chord in root position. So just having it in root position makes it a bit more solid. This chord, well, I've kept that the same. There's no problem at all. This chord, I've kept the same, but I've changed the inversion. Now, here we have this E minor chord going to this D major chord, this chord 6 going to chord 5. So I'm going chord 6 to 5 in first inversion, partly because the soprano part's coming down a note, but it means that the bass part comes up a note. So just changing the inversion flushes out my consecutive or parallel problem, and we get a better result. Next, I've changed the chord 4, the C major chord, works perfectly well with a G, but it's always worth asking yourself, well, if things are not working, is there another chord that fits G? Well, yes, G major chord 1 or E minor chord 6. So I've changed that from a chord 4 to a chord 1, or a C major chord to a G major chord. I've not changed the last 2 chords, but just trying to get opposite motion between the top and the bottom to avoid those octaves there is something I've tried to do. Now, some textbooks say even if you do this, that's still considered to be consecutive or parallel fifths. It seems a funny one because They're actually moving in opposite directions. But the argument being that this is simply a relocated octave of this G up here. Had it been this G up there, they would still be consecutive. That's what some textbooks argue. Other textbooks say, well, no, because you've relocated the octave, they're going in opposite directions, so we don't regard those as consecutive or parallel. So I wanted to include that example just because there's sometimes a slight difference of opinion about that. What about my revised version? What does it sound like? It sounds like this. So it's kind of giving you a better result than having all these parallels. Here's the revised. Okay, so it's just giving us more independence of parts. So is it a massive difference? Not actually huge, but it's something that we perhaps want to tune into because it's a way of getting the parts to be more independent of each other to get a more kind of wholesome, slightly more satisfying result. So that's voice leading tip 6, avoiding these parallel or consecutive perfect fifths and perfect octaves. Well, if you've enjoyed this video, let me invite you to the Music Matters website, www.mmcourses.co.uk. And in particular, you may be someone who is orchestrating music or interested in orchestrating music, but not quite sure about how to do that, or feeling confident about instruments that you play, not so confident about instruments that you don't play. Let me suggest you have a look at our orchestral scoring course. And in this course, we go through the string section of the orchestra, we go through the woodwind section, we go through the brass section, and we look at every single instrument and we learn about its ranges, which clef you write in, all sorts of instrumental techniques. What are the various ways in which you can play the violin or the trumpet or the clarinet? What are the impacts of playing in different registers? What things are difficult for players? What things are easy for players? What are the things that are most effective when you're writing for this instrument? What are the things that actually are not so effective when you're writing for this instrument? Or notes or particular parts of the range it will be better to avoid. So if you're someone who's kind of working with orchestral scores or wanting to work with orchestral scores, well, this could be an ideal course for you. So orchestral scoring, have a look at that. Lots of other courses on there and other things for you to be involved in if you so wish. www.mmcourses.co.uk